On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, My Landlord Died. Is my lease still valid?
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Shawn Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Shawn Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and welcome back on Zoom, George Corbello, your financial coach. How you doing, George?
Hey, how you doing, buddy? I have to say that I do like being in person. Zoom is convenient, but I totally understand that we can't be in the same locations all the time because, you know, you're like a busy lawyer and stuff. So, yeah, that happens.
I miss you, buddy. Single teardrop. What we decided to do in today's episode, we got a handful of questions that have accumulated over from emails, from whatever source. We've got a couple of questions that have accumulated here. So I thought we would go over some of them. You'll get my take. You'll get George's take. We are going to save one or two of them. We've been doing this after pod show here. So we're going to save one or two or more of them. If you want to see that, the only way to get there is the Patreon page. But we will answer some of these questions. Before we get there real quick, I do want to say a big thank you to our sponsors. The first one is Sam Cohen with Attorneys First Insurance. If you've been listening for any length of time, you know that Sam writes errors and omissions insurance or malpractice insurance for attorneys and title companies all over the country. And a great way to support us would be to contact Sam if you know an attorney or title company that is looking for E&O coverage, errors and omissions coverage, malpractice coverage. You can reach him at sam@attorneysfirst.com or just the website, which is attorneysfirst.com. Actually, I think I don't need to say the www, do I? It's just people will know.
I mean, if you age yourself, it's okay. You could also say AOL. You could do a search on AOL and get there
at too. AOL.com. Or I wouldn't say AOL. I would say at AmericaOnline.com. So anyway, let's jump into the first of these questions before we get too far off the rails here. And it was the title of the episode. So this comes from questions I get all the time related to landlord-tenant issues. And so if there's a tenant living in the property and the landlord dies, what happens to the lease agreement? And most lease agreements will say, and I actually wrote a blog about this one as well, most lease agreements say that the lease agreement, the legal word is inures, I-N-U-R-E-S, inures to the benefit of the heirs and successors and beneficiaries. Basically, that means that the heirs and the beneficiaries have to continue on with whatever contracts the deceased person entered into. So I think that if the landlord dies, rent is owed somewhere. And so if I were the tenant, what I would do is I would either pay the rent into a separate bank account so that on the day that the landlord does come calling or the landlord's heirs do come calling, you've got the money saved up in a bank account, or continue to pay the rent. If you've been paying rent to a particular bank account, continue paying it automatically into that bank account, because even though the landlord may have died, somebody eventually is going to come along and say, where's the rent? And if you haven't paid the rent, they're going to evict you.
That would make sense. I wish that would happen with some of the big corporation that we're renting from. But I would imagine that you're hoping they'll have like an LLC or something that is protecting the lease itself or the rental property that. But I would imagine that they would still, you signed the lease, right? Aren't you obligated to actually pay out to the extent of the lease itself? I mean, unless it says in the if I drop dead, hey, we're good, we're square. You just got to leave in 30 days.
If the tenant passes away, those debts don't typically continue on to the tenant's heirs. So if the tenant has parents or children or somebody else that's not on the lease agreement, if it's a husband and wife, and the husband dies, but both husband and wife sign the lease, the wife tenant would still be responsible for the lease payments. But if someone dies and they rent a piece of property and they have kids, those kids don't automatically become responsible for the lease payments just because dad passed away. So the debts tend to die with the person that owed the debt. So I wouldn't worry about that if I were the tenant. If I were the landlord, then the landlord or the landlord's estate or the landlord's heirs are eventually going to be owed that money. So like I said, I think the tenant should just either continue to pay them or pay them to a separate bank account or whatever they're going to do. One interesting issue that this brings up that I actually dealt with earlier this week, as a matter of fact. The property got sold. So the landlord didn't die, but the landlord sold the property. Well, again, the new owner takes subject to any lease agreements that were in place at the time of the sale. So if you're a tenant and somebody takes over the lease, whether it's commercial or residential, the call that I got earlier this week was actually a commercial situation, but it really doesn't matter. It can be residential or commercial. If somebody calls you and says, hey, we bought the property, we're the new owner, I think you're entitled to say, great, show me proof. And once you show me proof, I'm glad to pay you the rent instead of the old landlord. So that's kind of an offshoot of the same question.
So if the new owners come in, though, is there anything in the lease that they could kick you out? Like, let's say I bought the property just because I want to, I'll be the bad landlord, but demolish and put a parking lot. They still have to honor the agreement to end without actually kicking out, unless there's a clause or something in the agreement that was signed.
Yeah. Now, one of the dangers becomes if you're in a comfortable position with your landlord and the lease expired 2 years ago and you just continued paying the monthly rent and the landlord hasn't said anything and you haven't said anything about it, then Florida law says that that lease continues on a month-to-month basis. So when the new landlord comes in, when the new owner comes in and they say, we want to raise the rent, we want to kick you out so we can refurbish the place, demolish the place, redo the place, whatever, they can give you, it's 15 days notice prior to the end of the month if it's a month-to-month lease. So as we record this, we are at the very, very beginning of February. You could literally give notice today that says you got to be out by the end of February. A lot of landlords misunderstand that and say from the day I give you notice, it's 15 days. That's wrong. Florida law says 15 days prior to the end of the month. So if you gave notice, for example, on February 20, you couldn't say 15 days from February 20. You have until the end of March to get out.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I would have known that. So that's a great call out. And I usually usually you go on the internet, it's like, 30-day notice. That's all you need. But unless it's specific to the lease agreement, I would have never known that. So it's 15. It's not 15 days. It's 15 days prior to the end of the month. So that's a great call out there. Okay. So
if you're a tenant, you just want to make sure, what does the lease say? And that's what actually happened to my friend that called me earlier this week. It'd become a month-to-month lease agreement, and the landlord took it over, and the landlord said, I'm going to raise your rent at the end of the month. And he said, well, you can't do that. And unfortunately, the landlord can, because it's a month-to-month lease. And he gave more than 30 days notice. No, the law only requires 15, and he gave more than 30. So in that kind of a scenario, unfortunately, my tenant buddy was kind of left out in the dust because there was really nothing he could do about it.
Well, let me see. Let me give you this other scenario in this before we go to the next question. I am the dead landlord. What should I have put in place to ensure that I'm protected? What are some of the things that I should have in place if I am a landlord and I passed away?
Definitely you want to make sure that your heirs know where the lease is, or if you have multiple property where the leases are. You definitely want to make sure that your heirs have access to those things so they can access those documents. You may also want to do a little pre-planning and maybe create an estate plan and either put the properties into a trust or have some kind of what's called like a pour-over trust that basically says anything in my will pours over into my trust. You definitely want to do some estate planning in that kind of a scenario and either structure everything so that your heirs know where the leases are, or it goes into a trust, or it's already in a trust that the heirs would automatically inherit. And that way you can avoid probate, you can avoid the time, you can avoid the cost, and then the heirs can just pick up with the lease wherever it left off when you passed away. So I know we don't do any estate planning here at the office, but we do know, both of us know some great estate planning attorneys. So if you have questions about, I have properties that are in my name or in LLCs or in trusts or whatever, I am a landlord, and you have questions about this stuff, reach out to me, reach out to George. Yeah. We can connect you with attorneys that can help put some estate planning behind all of it.
Yeah, and I think it's a great idea to do that pre-planning. As much as we like to think we're going to live forever, we know that life can be interesting like that. And, I think the other thing too, a lot of folks are afraid, well, if I do the pre-planning, that just means then that it puts it into the universe that I'm going to die. And it's like, dude, I mean, I guess eventually everything's going to happen for a reason, but let's not be afraid of these kind of situations, because I think the biggest thing we've seen with a lot of folks itself is not having that plan in place just leaves a lot of stuff disorganized for the people who are left over.
And I can tell you from someone that just went through it, my wife and I just literally in the last 5-6 months created our estate plan, and I actually felt better when it was over, because now there's clear instructions. If something happens to the two of us, where do our kids go? What happens to the house? What happens to the law firm? All of that stuff is now covered in the event something happens to one, or even, if we're driving somewhere and my first boss, I'll never forget my first boss in Miami. I always thought it was kind of morbid, and now I'm like, I don't know. It was him and his wife, and I believe they had 5 kids. They had a lot of kids. I don't remember. I think they had 5. And when they would go on family vacations, half the family would fly with him. The other half of the family would fly with the wife, and they would take different flights to arrive at their destination. And when I asked them why they did that, they said, well, if one of the planes goes down, at least some of the family can survive. And I always thought that was really morbid, although now it's kind of making a little bit of sense. But they were British too, so they were kind of weird. But no offense to any of our British listeners.
He's already gotten himself into trouble here. So, all right, before we keep digging here, let's go to the next question itself. I'll give you one here. I think most of the time here, I would say personally, we stay in jobs that we don't like, or we don't, I guess it's a job. So that's kind of the way it is. Right. But, should I stay in my job for the 401k? One of the benefits that we get with 401k is obviously the beauty of the match. I get 5%, 12%, 10%. I mean, if depending on the job, depending on the career that you have, that kind of match itself is pretty good. But I guess the question for folks itself is, well, should I stay at this job just because of the 401k? Because it's so good. Yeah,
I'm a little torn on that one. I mean, honestly, part of me says, yeah, if your employer's matching, that's just free money, especially if you're vested in the 401k. Vested meaning it all becomes yours. And different employers and different 401k plans have different things that you want to check out. Sometimes the employer will match, but you're not vested for 3 years or 5 years, right, or whatever exactly. It is. But it's same, should I stay in the job for health insurance? Yep, should I stay in the job for this benefit, that benefit? I'm torn, because on the one hand, it's nice to have those benefits in place. But on the other hand, if you're not happy in your job, you may end up making more money if you decide to do something that makes you more happy. And then the 401k match, the health insurance, the whatever benefit becomes less important because you're doing something that you enjoy doing, that you make more money at. I don't know. I'm torn. What do you think?
So I'm in the same boat. I never I learned as we get older, you don't want to do something that you don't like doing. So for me, there's a difference between having a job and having your career. There are jobs that you do just to make money, just to do certain things. But let me throw this. How many of us actually take advantage of a 10% match or 5% match? I've had clients and talked to folks itself. Remember, we have, folks today that can barely afford a $400 emergency. Now you're telling me that, hey, I'm staying for my job because I have a 5% match on my 401k. I'm like, let's look at the situation holistically and say, am I fully taking advantage of that match and doing that? But of course, what does that mean for the rest of my financial situation? How am I doing? What am I doing itself? Because I think that's where, sometimes we get delusional. Yeah. I was use that bad word, but delusional with our own kind of situation.
Well, and I think there's 2 things there. So the first is, are you taking advantage of the match? Because the match is just free money. And I never really understood that until I got older. In other words, if the company says we'll match up to 3% of your salary, that's the company paying. Right. So let's make it easy. If your salary is $1,000 every other week, so the company is saying you're going to put in 3%. You're going to put in $30. Sorry,
I was about to say.
Math is I'm an accounting major, everybody. 3% of 1,000 is $30, but the company's also going to give you $30.
Right.
Now, again, it depends on when it's vested and when it becomes your money versus if you leave early, it goes back to the company. But still, the company is literally going to give you an extra $30 at those numbers every paycheck. The first thing that I thought was, if you're not taking advantage of the full match, build up to it. So if
Right.
you can only do 1%, do 1%. If the company says we'll match up to 3%, I don't see any need for you to contribute 5% and let the company match 3%, and then you're just giving up 2% of your salary. I don't see any reason to do that. But
Well,
if the
if
company
you're in the position to invest, I'm okay with that. But you're right. If we're in that position, there's definitely different avenues, match up to the 3%. And sometimes it depends too. Like, are you a traditional IRA or Roth IRA? So
Yeah.
those are going to be the other things that come into play
And I
in
think if
regards to
you're-
where you invest too.
if you're in a position where the match is 3%, but you can afford to give up 5% of your paycheck, then yeah, like you said, match 3% into your company's retirement plan. Take the other 2%, and I know there's rules in terms of if you invest in a 401k, you might not be able to invest in an IRA or a Roth or whatever. So double check all this with your financial advisor. But if you can afford to give up 5% of your salary for investment purposes, but the company only matches 3%, then match the 3% the company's doing, take the other 2% and put it into something else. Put it into real estate, put it into crypto, put it into the stocks, put it into another retirement account, an annuity, a
Right.
CD, whatever you want to put it in. If you can't get to the 3%, start at 1.
Start somewhere.
Start at 1 and work your way up. But again, I think it goes back to the question, if I hate going into work every day, whether they match 3% or 5%
Right.
or 10%, if I hate going into work every day, I'm not going to be as productive to begin with. There's other jobs. I mean, regardless of how bad the job market is or appears to be, there's other jobs.
What's important to you as a benefit? For me, important benefits, obviously salary is one, your investment is another. Healthcare, obviously some of those are for me are like obvious things, especially as I get older, and taking care of the family. But the people I work with, maybe the remote situation, if I like working remotely or, going to the office or going to a certain office, maybe I like traveling more, depending on the job as well. We have to look at all of the things that are going to drive us to go to work every day. And trust me, the money is good, but that's just one piece. We always think about like, oh, that, I'm getting paid this and this and this. And then, of course, 6 months later, you're miserable because I'm getting great money, but I hate the people I work with. And it's just little things like that you have to consider when doing these kind of decisions.
Well, and I can tell you from the employer perspective, I know that my employees are not solely motivated by money. And so one of my employees, she gets to work from home 1 day a week. And
Right.
She doesn't work at all. She only works 4 days a week. Now, if I absolutely needed her on a Friday, she would work on Friday. But one of the deals that I made with her in lieu of additional salary is she doesn't have to make the commute 2 days a week. One of those days, she doesn't even have to work at all. So she's got a 3-day weekend every weekend.
Nice.
So, talk to your employer. If you're not happy at your job, talk to your employer. There may be if you're a good employee, there may be things your employer can do to make it more desirable for you to be there.
I love it. I got 2 other questions itself, but I'll let you. What you got? What you got for the viewers? What kind of questions are you getting?
I actually had a consult sort of today about this topic. So the next one I got is, can I avoid my business debts by just shutting down? So my business is going under. Can I just shut down the business, open a new business, doing the exact same thing, start working in that new business, make a bunch of money, and avoid the debts of the old company? And that gets a little tricky. There is something called the Fraudulent Transfers Act.
Right.
And basically what that means is if you move stuff around solely to avoid paying the creditors, all that stuff you've done to move those assets has no impact. In other words, the debt is still owed. The creditors can follow the paper trail. So if the law firm were to suddenly go under and I said, well, look, I can just hang a shingle and start up Shawn Law instead of Yesner Law.
Right.
And avoid all the debts of Yesner Law. Well, does it have the same address? It's got the same license. It's got the same head attorney. It's got the same customer list. It's going to take over the podcast. It's going to take over the website. The creditors would say, in essence, it is the old business just with a new mask. And they may still be able to go after it. Now, that doesn't mean that they will in every case. The danger with just shutting down the old one and starting a new one, you've got to somehow separate those two businesses. Otherwise, the creditors will just be able to follow the paper trail and the old debts will still be owed by the new business.
Now, it depends on, too, if small business owners might still use like their own social security number. So those debts follow you regardless. But if your business has its own EIN I would imagine that's where a lot of that paper trail would be, or how would they
Yeah.
track that?
Well, the old EIN, the documents with the Florida Secretary of State or whatever state you may have incorporated in.
Right.
Plus, if you shut down your business and there's any personal guarantees, this is the conversation I was having with a potential client this morning. If you shut down the business, but you still have guarantees, well, remember, what that means is the business is the first layer that owes the debt. But if the business doesn't pay, whoever signed the guarantee has to pay. So if you shut down the business and I had to guarantee my rent payments. If Yesner Law shut its doors, the landlord could come after me personally for the rent. Yesner Law has a business credit card, but I had to sign the personal guarantee to get that business credit card. If we shut our doors, the bank's going to come knocking on the door saying, what about the Yesner Law credit card? Right. Even worse than that, when I started the law firm, and a lot of business owners do this, when I started the law firm, I had a Bank of America MasterCard that was at zero. And so I use that for all the debts of the law firm. And at the end of the month, the law firm pays off that card. And it's kind of cool because it's a points card. And so,
of course,
IRS, I absolutely report all the points. But if the business shuts down, Bank of America isn't going to care that those debts were incurred for the law firm. They're going to say that credit card's in Shawn Yesner's name. Shawn Yesner needs to pay the money back. We don't care where he's working. So those are the kinds of things you need to be careful of when you're deciding, should I shut down the business? Should I make a go of it? Should I close down and reopen somewhere else? Did you keep the same bank? Did you keep the same address? Right. Did you keep the same, license? Did you keep the same website? Did you use the same desks? Did you use the same computers? Did you use the same customer lists? All that kind of stuff. If the creditors can prove that, then shutting down the business and starting the new business makes no difference.
Well, I'll throw this added, is it ethically? We could always say, is it ethically then, being able to do that kind of stuff? Because again, there feels this ickiness of trying it, but at least that's my opinion. I'm not judging others, but what do you think there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I get clients all the time that say, I borrowed the money, I need to pay it back. And I get it. You want to be moral and you want to do that. Yeah, I get it. And so I think, when you say ethics to an attorney, we can be disbarred for bad ethics. So I don't know that it rises to that level.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I think there may be a morality component to it. At the same time, Visa's not going out of business if they don't get your 20 grand.
True.
Visa's made 200 grand just in the time we've been recording so far. So, they're not going to go out of business by losing your 20 grand.
I would say maybe, but no, I doubt those sky rises in Delaware are going to have any concerns or issues this week.
If not getting my 20 grand bankrupts Visa, Visa's got bigger problems.
We got some bigger issues. Fair enough. So the more common question that I've seen, and this is something that we can talk about when it comes to crushing debt and all that, but should I repay debt or should I invest? So going back into that adage, that kind of question that always goes back, it's like, well, if I'm focusing on debt, I'm not investing. But if I'm investing, I'm focusing on, there's this circle that we stay in there. So let's just solve the issue right now. Let's put a line in the in the sand right now. What's the answer when it says that kind of question?
I'm kind of torn on this one as well. I guess if you follow Mr. Dave, he who shall not be named.
It's like Baltimore.
If you follow him, he's going to say you don't invest until your debt's gone.
Correct.
And I get it, because if you're investing in something that's making even 10%, but you're paying 18% interest on a credit card, you're losing 8% a month still. So I get it. But I don't know. Part of me wants to say you can do both. There's room to do both. There's room to pay down debt and invest at the same time. I get it. If I came into a lot of money and I used it to pay off my debt, then I have less interest that I'm paying, less expense that I'm paying. And so I guess theoretically I could pay off the debt, and then whatever interest I save by the debt being gone, I can invest that. So
correct.
I don't know. Honestly, I'm torn on it. I come down on the side of there's probably room to do both. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree. I think there's opportunity to do both. I understand the method of get rid of the debt as quickly as possible. We need some type of urgency, and some of the motivation comes back to, well, I'm not investing. There needs to be some fire under me to get out of debt so that I can invest. But you brought up a good point earlier on. Start with 1% investing. So let's say I get a raise. why can't I use some of that raise to invest? And that could be the 1%. And every year I get a raise or there's an increase in salary, bump up your investing from 1 to 2%. Like these are little tactics that we do to kind of automate our savings, get us into that mode of saving from that perspective. And I like the fact of let's do some investing and then we can say to ourselves, well, what's the percentage of investing you should be? Well, 10%, 15% of your salary, whatever the number might be. But what's preventing you from hitting that number? Well, it's my debt. Okay, let's then focus on getting the debt out of the way so that I can increase more into the investing that we want to do down the road.
And I've said that. We've talked about that before on the show as well. In other words, if you're able to invest 1% this year, save 1% this year, and you get $1,000 raise, $1,000 per month raise, well, it doesn't mean you got to spend $1,000 more every month.
Right.
You could invest 100 of that 1,000. You could then take 700 and put it towards debt. And then you take the other 200 and put it towards lifestyle, extra going out money, extra groceries, whatever it is. Just because you get a raise doesn't mean you have to spend the entirety of the raise. In fact, most rich people that you talk to, most wealthy people that you talk to live well below their means. So if you get a raise of $20 a month, only increase your investing by $1 a month. But that's $1 more than you were able to invest in last year.
See, and that's the thing. I think a lot of us today, we feel like, but it's so small, the amount. Oh, it's not going to make a difference. We're looking for habits, habit forming. And we have to put ourselves in this position where it's like, start somewhere. Automate the $5, automate $10, $100 for investing itself. You have to start somewhere because by the time you get to that moment, you're going to be our age guy, which is,
It's the old thing that people don't really understand. Do you want a penny that doubles every day for 30 days, or do you want $1 million? And most people will say $1 million. But when you look at it, a penny that doubles every day for 30 days is up to like 5 million by the time it's done. Because it just it's a penny the first day, it's 2 cents the next day, 4 cents, 8 cents. So it's not long before you're at $1, $2, $4, $8. So it's that whole concept of quick satisfaction, I guess, instant gratification kind of thing. There's got to be some discipline there as well. And at the same time, if you get a raise, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, we're going to go out and have a nice dinner to celebrate the raise. We're not going to go out every night this week and celebrate the raise. We're not going to get a $500 raise and go blow it on $1,000 of dinner. But if we get a raise, go out and celebrate the victories, celebrate the wins, no matter how small.
What's going to motivate you? And you're going to find those kind of things out in your journey when it comes to the instant gratification. So then put it in your budget that you have a little bit of extra money for that. Oops, I just love those jeans. Boom, bought them.
Right.
And there's no shame in doing that. We have to use our budgets to allow us that freedom. And I think a lot of people think like a zero base, it's got to be, I'm going to use and I'm like, guys, it's okay to do that. But put yourself fun money, put some money in your wallet so that anytime that impulse buy comes along, okay, maybe it's only $20 or $50, depending on what your impulse is, but you shouldn't be impulsing on large purchases anyway. And not that I'm being, the parent here, but we have to hold ourselves a little bit of accountable, but it doesn't mean that I'd stop going to Starbucks because of these things. And I think habits, behaviors, we've got to work small to make the big ones kind of work in our favor.
That's what I think. It's those little habits. I had a friend of mine say to me the other day, stacking nickels, one nickel by itself. But when you start stacking them, you get $2. And when you stack 2 of them, you get $4 and $8. And so it's one nickel by itself doesn't make a difference. 50 nickels is $2. So it's that stacking nickels concept.
I like that. Well, guys, pennies and nickels and just compound interest.
There you go.
It seems I love that.
So
what else, buddy? Well,
I wonder if we should save the last one. And I've got an interesting story for you that happened to my son this weekend. But maybe we save that for the after show. So if people are interested in that kind of stuff, they can go to the Patreon page and sign up and get that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So again, every week we're putting out some bonus content for our patrons. What we're looking to do is obviously name it. We just say Afterpod, which is, two old guys saying, yeah, it's pretty cool to say Afterpod. But that's one thing we want to try and figure out. But the other thing too is just really bonus material, get to know us, understand, get a little bit more from the Crushing Debt podcast itself. And I think these are just other opportunities. We're also looking to expand, I guess, too, right? Courses and just other things that we want to give back to the community. So I think there's just opportunities, but again, get involved, help us out. And we'll be grateful for any type of support.
I've got 2 courses kind of rattling around in this dome up here.
And that noggin of yours.
One is about small claims court, and the other is going to be more so my background in debt and accounting, and using that to help businesses that say, we need to generate a little extra here, we need to spend a little less over there. And so it may be a course on doing that, the crushing debt, but from the corporate level.
Nice. Well, what I was thinking itself is obviously handed a little bit more on the personal side. So I know there's so much information out there regarding, budgets and debts and things like that. But really, I think that balance between, the habits and the numbers. So really focusing on some of those kind of things to not just get us started on that journey, but getting us through and motivated so that we can finish that journey. I think that's the thing that we're kind of focusing on as well. That's awesome, man.
In the meantime, let me talk about our second sponsor real quick, Mark Purvis. He has a website called legacyspotlight.com, and what Mark does there is he will capture your stories. So if there's a story that you want to pass down to future generations, or if you want to capture stories of older generations, legacyspotlight.com. Mark is an Emmy award-winning videographer. He's got over 20 years experience. He's been doing this forever. He's done videos for me. If you want to see those videos, you can go to the website, the Yesner Law website. He made it fun. He made it easy. So definitely you can catch up with Mark at legacyspotlight.com. Check out the Curbelo Financial TikTok page. Check out the Yesner Law YouTube page. We've mentioned Patreon a bunch of times. If you are listening to this show on the day of its release, I believe the next day, February 17th, is the largest networking event in Tampa Bay. So if you are listening to this on the day of release, it is not too late to get a ticket. If you're listening to this after February 17 of 2023, it is too late. Look for maybe future events, but George and I will be there. So what would be really cool, George? What should we do if, let's say, a listener walks up to us, they listen to the episode on the day it's released, and they walk up to one of us at the largest, because we're both going to be there.
Right.
And they walk up to us at the event. What should they say, and what should we do for them if they say the word?
Oh, no.
Putting you on the spot.
Well, I would say maybe it's something like Yesner or platypus or something. Something like that, a sneaky word or something, a secretive word, but
just say you listen to the episode.
That works too.
Okay. And we'll do something. I don't know what we'll do. We'll figure out something. Anyway, I think that'll do it for the end of this week's episode. And we hope that all these tips and tricks and strategies that we're going over help you have more money at the end of the month rather than month at the end of the money. And we will talk to you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Shawn or connect with us on social media. Shawn Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.